Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon. This is the show where I take a look at every classic Doctor Who story plus a bunch of big finished audio dramas, one episode a day, 7 days a week. As always, this is, Doctor Who is a family show. This video is not meant to be aimed at children, so this should be, watch at your own risk, mainly to be comic book compliant. But today, on the 16th of December 2019, we're starting to look at the penultimate story from season 19, Earthshock, written by Eric Sayward and directed by Peter Grimwade, starting with part 1. Now, Earthshock starts out great. It is genuinely just a great, this great, this great sort of opening where we have our sense, we have the characters, all sort of, we have an introduction to the setting, an introduction to this idea of just this mining expedition that is, that is it's a good expedition. And they some people have been injured. They're sending a scouting party back in, and I'm gonna be honest. A lot of this first episode, as written, is essentially characters wandering around in caves a bunch. It's not entirely a bad thing. It doesn't. It's not like, oh, that makes the story terrible. No. It's actually kind of fine. It's fine for a story to do something like this. To have a thing with characters, like this, doing sort of exploring a bunch of caves and slowly, basically getting, I think it's like they slowly get themselves stuck in this, they essentially get themselves stuck in this cave, and in getting stuck in this cave, they are basically, they're basically being monitored throughout the cave, and they find out, oh, some androids killed some androids show up, and they basically get put into a shootout, and that's basically that plot line. Honestly, that's perhaps one of my biggest complaints here, is that this whole plot line, this whole opening of the story is kind of weak, and only building to the end of part 1 cliffhanger, which is the big surprise. This is a Cyberman story, which, I will be honest, it's a very effective story. And a very effective cliffhanger. Having the Cybermen show up, being like, oh, surprise. As a surprise in the end, it's a great way of doing this sort of it's a great way of introducing the Cybermen, who haven't been seen since Revenge of the Cybermen on television, and they haven't actually featured in any audios with Tom Baker. So you already get this idea of, okay, you've got Cybermen who are who have disappeared, who are just returning. We don't know what their plan is there, and obviously it's a big solid cliffhanger here that it's the Cybermen. But it's kind of sad is that the actual plot here is very weak, because we're kind of building up just to the Cybermen appearance at the end, which is very much it's one of the things that I don't think it doesn't work as well here, because just because of how it kind of how it kind of works together. I will say that actually, there's something else interesting is that the, uh, you know, that you have something great about just the inter-TARDIS relationships that I think Eric Saber does just an excellent job of writing. Um, mainly, mainly because um, it's one of those. It's one of those. It's this. There's this really real tension between the Doctor and Adric here. There's this idea that Adric kind of wants to go home. Now it kind of comes out of nowhere, um, but it feels um, it feels like something that the story should do. It's um, you know it's one of those really really um, you know uh, as it's one of those things where you get the characters down, and you kind of have Adric wanting to leave and trying to prove himself that he can. Um, it feels like Saber's trying to redeem him for the sort of on television, um, you know, just sort of his on television appearances of being sort of the whiny, bratty child character, um, which I don't know if it necessarily works, um, because it's just not one of those. It's not one of those things where you necessarily have, um, you know, you have things that don't quite uh, come together and work. Um, but what you do have is you have something very very nice about the Doctor and Adric having a falling out and the Doctor going out. That's how the Doctor gets involved. He leaves. He almost storms out because he's just kind of annoyed and sort of just needs time to think, and it's like time for me to be alone and to think and it's the best I can do. Something that I think Peter Davison actually plays really really well. So overall, Earthshock Part 1 is a solid start to the story. It gets it gets the characters down pat, and it starts things off in a very fun manner. So overall, I'm going to give Earthshock Part 1 an 8 out of 10. Alright, it's the 17th of December 2019, and I just finished watching Part 2 of Earthshock. Part 2 of Earthshock is interesting to say the least, because as an episode and as a story, it's one where you have you have this sort of you have this sort of transition from the from the first episode being mostly wandering around to the reveal of the Cybermen to this this bit of story where the characters just sort of just sort of work to move the setting to this freighter where the characters where basically the source of the signal is, and defusing a bomb. Those are the two very big sort of events that occur in this episode. It's not like, oh, we're doing some really really solid and big and new things with the show. But the story itself is just kind of it's just kind of action for action's sake. Like this is very much just this weird bit of you know it's one of those things where you have the story built up around just this idea, and I think it does it well. But the transitioning of the episode is just slightly less boring because, well, one, you have the Cybermen. Now Eric Sayward has to actually make the Cybermen do stuff, and they just sort of provide commentary on the events. They're trying to blow up Earth. That plan fails. So now at the very end, near the end of the episode, now it's like, well, now we have to have our contingency plan, which, fair enough, having a contingency is important. Doing a story of that, it's one of those great, it's one of those great things where you kind of you kind of have just a sense of things happening. I will say there's a lot of the enjoyment of the episode just sort of, I guess, comes from the tense nature of the story, but as a it's one of those stories where you don't entirely it's one of those things where you have it's just one of those things where you have to have the story sort of continue. That's my big problem here, is that the story is almost put on hold, and just like oh, we aren't really doing stuff with this plot. No, we are just sort of keeping the Cybermen off stage, introducing new characters on this freighter, and doing that as sort of our big middle of the episode plot. It's something that I don't think works well at all, and I don't think I think that it could have been done a little better. Now the actual it's fun. Peter Davison gives a great performance, and there is some definitely Eric Sayward still trying to make up for Adric's poor characterization in earlier stories here, but that being said, he is still, Adric's still Adric. Like they end the whole "does Adric want to go home or not" thing in this episode early on, and it's not a bad thing to be ending it, but it is kind of one of those things where you're like, well, I thought this would actually maybe do something interesting with the character and force some the character to change, or the Doctor to adapt to the character. It not just sort of like be there. It's one of those things where you don't quite get a full conclusion to sort of the idea of just the ideas present here, or even just what the story's going for. Um, it's just sort of there, and the cliffhanger doesn't even involve the Cybermen. It involves the Doctor and Adric being stopped, while Nyssa and Tegan wait on the TARDIS, finding a body, and like just the second half of this episode is kind of poorly paced, as it is introducing these characters, but it's not necessarily introducing them in interesting ways, or in ways that could show promise for the story. It's so overall, I am going to give part 2 of Earthshock a 7 out of 10. Alright, it's the 17th of December 2019, and I just finished watching part 3 of Earthshock. Now, okay, Earthshock, in fan circles, is regarded as one of the high points of Peter Davison's era. And if I'm gonna be honest, I think that's for the first episode and the 4th episode. And now we're on part 3, which is, it's a solid, good episode. I won't deny that. This is one of those things that, this is an episode that there's a reason people enjoy it, and there is a reason, and there's a reason that it just works. It's one of those episodes where it's a story all about, all about the characters. You have the Cybermen being Cybermen, and genuinely being effective, as Cybermen go. I won't deny that there's just this effective nature to them that isn't always seen. It's usually Cybermen are just like, oh, well, we're Cybermen, so we're one of those sort of villains that they are effective killing machines in this story, is what I'm trying to say. But one of my biggest things here is that they don't particularly act as though they're Cybermen. They act kind of like your generic villains. Like their plan is, they have, obviously a plan, and the plan is let's try and do this whole things with everything. Let's try to get everything together, and let's go crazy. But it doesn't entirely work, because mainly because they aren't trying to survive here. They're almost like in a story like Revenge of the Cybermen. They're almost trying to go for revenge, so much so that the Doctor in this episode actually calls them out on it. That there's a they seem to be acting emotional, which okay, I'll admit is kind of interesting. And I will say, David Banks, who plays the cyber leader, is a solid actor, and he plays the role very well. It's very much a role for him, and just a role that he fills in nicely. So does his lieutenant, played by Mark Hardy. They both have distinctive personalities, but they're also Cybermen. They're not supposed to necessarily be personalities. They're supposed to be more of a collective, which is, it's just a very, very weird sort of thing to do with characters, especially at this point in time, where they aren't they're not meant to be these, you know, um, they're not meant to be. They're meant to be, these emotionless creatures which, basically are like, right. Uh, we are in fact emotionless, and we do have a, we have a darker side, so to speak. Um, something that the story doesn't entirely, build up properly, but it at least does a decent enough job that you really do get the sense, um, that you get the sense that this is, one of their appearances, and I will say that it is an appearance that I think is important, and an appearance that I think um, will show just what, and will understand just what it's doing, um, and where it's going. Um, it's a solid. Uh, it's a solid adventure, and shows a big promise of of things to come. That this is and easily could be, um, one of those things, one of those stories where you have such an ending for it. It's an ending that sort of builds up. But I will say, but there's also just this whole idea, um, of the story not coming to a conclusion based on, it's you just don't quite know where it is. Like it's the episode tries to build up tension, and I will say the captain's a fun character. The interrogations are fun. But a lot of this feels almost like it's meant to be a six-parter that's been shoved down to four, because you have, the Doctor really only getting involved here very early on. You know, it's one of those things where, uh, you know, it's one of those things where you have a story, but you don't do anything, uh, anything all that interesting with it. Um, it's just a story where you have, you know, uh, you have the characters, um, you know, you have the characters just doing things. Um, uh, it's this big, it's this big sort of thing where, um, you know, uh, it's this entire story, and I just think it just doesn't work in a lot of ways. It, this third episode is just kind of average and very transitory as we try to move in. So overall, I'm going to give Earthshock Part 3 a 6 out of 10. Alright, it's the 18th of December 2019, and I just finished watching Part 4 of Earthshock. Now, Part 4 of Earthshock is I think this is very easily the episode of Earthshock that gets people excited and what makes it a total classic. Mainly for what basically for what it does with, it's the story. This is the episode where, spoilers, Adric dies, and I'm gonna start. I'm gonna start off this, I guess, discussion, if that's the best term for it. Um, Talking just about, uh, just about that. Um, just sort of, just basically because I think that the death of Adric is something that, in the context of this episode, is played to perfection by Matthew Waterhouse, Peter Davison, Janet Fielding, and Sarah Sutton. They all play it perfectly. Adric goes out with a quip, which that might be my one slight complaint, that he goes out with, "Now I'll never know if I was right," but I think that's just more of the character trying to have some sort of humor in the face of death. Because he dies here. He's a dead character. Which is, isn't something that Doctor Who really often does. Kill off a character like this. The companions don't generally end up dead. The only time that happened was previously on television, was with Katarina and Sarah Kingdom back in the Daleks' Master Plan. That's how long this has been, which kind of emphasizes the point that this is a big deal. It's not. This isn't something to be taken lightly, and it isn't something that is and it's something that the characters will have to reflect upon, because of it. It's something that, and it's something that I think is incredibly important to have for the Fifth Doctor, as it sort of cuts its teeth. And this is, I think, the first time where it also sort of puts danger back into Doctor Who here. Like the character, you have a character who dies, and then and that's just something that is, that is just, it's important to know that that the character, that there is now this danger. It's just this sort of real sense that there is, there is danger here, clearly, but it's not like a danger of it's not like your standard danger. It's a more it's more just this danger of what the characters are going through, and now having to process these emotions. Just they have to deal with it, and it is kind of just hard. It's going to be it's a difficult thing for them to go through with, and move on from here. But I think it'll be important in the long run. That being said, the rest of the episode is also great, as the tension is building to that climax. The Cybermen actually do kind of act more like Cybermen here. They are essentially trying to wipe out Earth, because Earth has conquered them in the past, not in revenge, but because they basically They're basically wanting to see if they can get the Earth into a position where they are, where they are essentially able to invade the rest of the galaxy. And in this episode, they invade the TARDIS, which is a shock. It's an incredible shock, and it really hits you that, like, wow, this story is really going for, for something a little darker and just a little more being of being wary, because um, and then the Doctor ends up having to kill a bunch of Cybermen. Nissa guns one down. It gets very violent, and I think Eric Sayward does a great job dealing with the violence of the story without making it feel like it's gratuitous. Um, it feels like this is, a story where you need uh, this sort of violent stuff for the story really to work, and for the story to work, it has to go a little bit into this sort of delve a little deeper into the sort of nature of what it's trying to do, and just as well, there's the real sense that that it creates the Cybermen as a good villain. They're back and forth, and they could easily appear again. This is just, though, if I had one complaint, it might be that this was just the last episode. But I think it's still a great episode. And when it comes to on television, probably one of the best singular episodes of Peter Davison's run. So overall, I'm going to give Earthshock Part 4 a 10 out of 10. That being said, we add up the scores and average them out to give Earthshock a final score of 7.75 out of 10. Thank you everybody for watching this installment of the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon. As always, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already, and hit the notification bell. And join me next time we take on the Season 19 finale with Time Flight.